Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual by my son Tucker Hazel, and we're here today to review the father-son game of the century, actually probably just the year, Lego Builder's Journey. But before we do, if you want to tell us your thoughts on the game, really anything else at all, join our Discord link as usual, top of the description right down there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. This is a review. These are rare. These used to be more common, but these are rare now. So support
Yeah,
this one. Do it.
yeah.
Do it.
And it's been a long time since we've recorded a review of an indie game like this. Very
Yeah.
short, very simple. Get our thoughts out on the YouTube so we can, I don't know, and people can know what we think. Lego Builder's Journey. We bought it yesterday. We both played through it. It is only takes about 80 minutes to complete. That was my play clock as I finished the journey. But Abram, what did you think of Lego Builder's Journey?
I thought it was okay. I really love aspects of this game. I think it's beautiful. I love minimalism in design, whether that's HUD elements or gameplay elements, and I think that this is both. This is just
Yeah,
a really subtle game that extends to the storytelling. I think that the narrative about this sort of father consumed by work and this sort of playful son, right, and the sort of tensions between those are really interesting. It's a pretty archetypical story, but the way it's told feels really fresh and new and heartwarming. I don't think it's as emotional as other people said, but I
yeah.
do think it is still a well-told story that does a lot with little.
Hmm.
But I think that the controls really let down the first 45 minutes of the experience while you're getting used to them. But then at
Yeah,
that point, you got maybe half an hour of the game left. And also, I don't think that all of the puzzles are equally good. I feel
sure.
like some of them are simple but not necessarily intuitive. So there's like these
Okay.
puzzles where you're slotting in little colored Lego chips into a board to complete boards and match colors and everything. And I felt like I understood the general concept, but didn't really get logically why it made sense. And then those ideas kind of fizzle out because it's a game that introduces a new mechanic and moves on, which I think is successful for a game of this length, but kind of leads to certain segments not feeling as compelling as others.
When I came off this game and the psychopath I am, went straight to backlog to make sure everyone and their grandmother knew that I had played Lego Builder's
Of
Journey,
course.
I gave it an 8 out of 10. And as the last 15 hours since I finished it, I've died down on my excitement of the game a little bit. I think it's a game that leaves a much better impact as you're playing it than after
Sure.
you've left, because you were asking me for a little bit of help through video calls, like, oh, how do I do this puzzle? And I realized that even though I played it less than an hour ago, it took me a moment to remember each of the puzzles.
Yeah.
Meaning they're not particularly memorable. I think this game is, as you said, a masterclass in simplicity. I think when you start off the game and you just get one brick, you place it down, the sea washes it away, and
Yeah.
it's just like that's a serene moment of minimalist game design that was like, it was a really calming, soothing moment for me. Like, okay, I'm gonna at least enjoy certain aspects of this. And I think while I want to focus on the positives, because on the whole, I think it's a game that I really do enjoy. I think some aspects of it just don't contribute to me thinking, okay, this is the super memorable, replayable experience that I want out of these short, really relaxing games. I love my games like A Short Hike,
Yeah.
like Grow Home, these games that are relaxing, simple. You get your piano music, you get simple controls. It's just about having a chill time. But this game, the controls I think are probably the biggest hindrance,
Yeah.
in terms of you have the option to use touch controls, but it works even worse than the button controls. But there is just this element of confusion as you're trying to place a brick in a specific place, but the camera doesn't quite work with that, and you can't really move it up and down. You can only move it in the 2D plane, so it like sometimes doesn't snap properly. It's a little bit awkward. I don't think it breaks the game entirely for me, as I was able to get a handle on it pretty quickly. And considering the game's length, I don't think it doesn't really pad out the game too long. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't struggling with the controls for an extra 30 minutes of the game. Like it was only
Right.
a couple seconds each time, which of course adds up. But the one thing that I do want to focus on, why I think this game is so still well designed, even if it does have those issues, is that, like you said, it introduces new mechanics and moves on. I think there's a really nice flow to this game, with each puzzle flowing into the next in terms of introducing a mechanic and just keeping it there for the next few, introducing something new each time, a new way to spin on each mechanic. And I always felt like each little diorama, each world was giving me something fresh to look at, or a different spin on something I had done before. And I like that it wasn't repetitive in that way. It always felt like they were keeping you on your toes with a new idea or a new spin on something you had already done.
Yeah, and I think that for a game that is as simplistic as this, that kind of variety is necessary
Yeah,
to keep the player engaged, even if the game is only 90 minutes or so. But I was reminded a lot of Sea of Solitude, which I reviewed earlier this year and talking about on BLB a little bit, wherein there were so many new mechanics introduced that you didn't have time to really sit with any of them.
sure.
And that sort of tension between fun variety and really surface level ideas didn't quite hit for me.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is the case in some instances. There's this
Sure.
one portion towards the end of the game which I absolutely loved, where you're playing as the dad and the robot, and you have to kind of manipulate bricks to morph them into larger ones. There's this
Yeah.
fun like
Oh, it's great.
duplication mechanic.
Hmm.
Visually creative, mechanically creative. That felt great. But then there's other things like trying to complete these little light puzzles or turning these knobs where it just felt like, okay, here's a new idea. We're taking it in a very surface level way that sort of makes sense. Sort of you just kind of fumble through because there's only a couple different
Sure.
inputs you could possibly do here.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I'm not sure that it always hit the way the designers wanted it to.
Yeah.
And
I,
for
I
me,
do
that is a
think
little
that
bit disappointing.
I do think that the game not only has variety in terms of specific level to level, but area to area, there are different
Yeah.
things that you're focusing on. Initially, you're just learning how building works. Then you're trying to climb up a mountain, and you're using just the bricks and building things to get your guy across. Then you have the section where you are building little skate ramps, which I think was really fun.
Yeah.
Then you go down in the depths, and there's the light puzzles, and there's the section with the bridges, as you were saying. And I think that variety works, whether each area is as engaging as the last. I think the first few are really interesting, and I enjoyed the ways that you had to, especially use Lego bricks in creative ways in terms of this isn't going to look good when you finish it,
Yeah.
but it's going to get you across. And that's really all it's about. And I think if we're going to spin off of that into the visuals of this game, is ideal. It's perfect. And I think that's really the reason both you and I were gravitated towards it is in its simplicity, it uses Legos to some of the best we've ever seen in video games. I loved how you can just take a moment, sit back, and look at the level and say, oh, well, I recognize that piece, and this is a
Yeah.
really creative way that they used it. There's sometimes little bits of grass sticking off, and you look carefully, it's actually a Lego cherry piece sticking off of things, or you'll see the ways that they incorporated things into the background elements or things sticking off. There's tons of detail in these little dioramas, and that I think is probably the strongest aspect of this game, just in terms of its visual style, which looks great, but just using Legos to make compelling little worlds.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the most beautiful games I've played in a long time. And I think it resonates on a couple different levels. I think it's great color palette, great
Yeah.
use of geometry and perspective and everything. But also, I used to love Legos. I used
Hmm.
to play a lot with Legos, collect a lot. Kind of fallen out of it as I've gotten older, but I've noticed this sort of trend making Legos more adult. I see a lot of my adult friends on Twitter buying a lot of these sets that are more complex and a little
Yeah.
bit more um, mature in the way that they're a little bit more artistic, and you can see that reflected in the game, the ways that
100%.
everything
Yeah.
is so clever and so deliberate. And I think that what makes it extra successful is not only, oh shit, I recognize these pieces, I love how they're using this to create a real sense of place, but also the fact that that does feed into gameplay.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
Even if you're just kind of stacking random pieces to make your guy get across, it's very satisfying to manipulate the blocks, not
Hmm.
to the same extent that the developers do, to make something as beautiful as they can, but still to leave my mark on the world and figure
Hmm.
out how I'm going to build my bridge to get across and everything. It's very satisfying on a lot of different levels, I think. And if it wasn't, I probably wouldn't have even wanted to finish the game, honestly, with my issues with it more from a mechanical design perspective. But the presentation really and the presentational concept lifts the entire experience up so high.
Yeah, and even not just the building of the worlds out of Lego bricks, but the way that they use Lego bricks in interesting ways. Two of my favorite examples being the very first thing that you see, the beach with the ocean, the way that the pixels of the Legos that are making the water flow and the color changes, and it's so natural, the stop motion animation that they use. It's like it that's
Yeah.
art right there. And the bubbling of the mud and the ways that certain bricks snap around. it's like when we saw the Lego movie for the first time and you saw things in the
Sure.
background where pieces were being built up and around, and you're like, wow, I can't believe that they did this. And it's such a unique way to use Legos that I was always excited to move on to the next level, not only to see how they, chose a different mechanic or progressed in an area, but to see what they could do with each level, because each level is entirely different. I mean, there's some that are similar that are continuations of others, but the fact is that they create an entirely new little separate thing for each level. And I think that that visual variety is also really, really fresh.
Yeah, and I think it probably a nice segue into the narrative then, because so much of the narrative is told through environmental storytelling and little
Mhm.
contextual clues, which is really great. No dialogue in the game, nothing like that. It's all told again through subtlety and through these little notes. And I think on the whole, it's again really successful.
Mhm.
Um, I kind of felt like my enjoyment of the story was mediated a little bit by my frustration, either with the controls or some of the puzzles, which took me out of it a little bit.
Sure.
And I didn't sometimes it wasn't always clear what was happening in the story.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Like the way that your son and the father and the robot kind of interplay, and I guess the third act or whatever, as you're in the factory above and below and everything is a little bit shaky in what they were trying to convey there. But I
Mhm.
think that the themes and the overall movement of the narrative were pretty clear and told
Yeah.
pretty well. And that also definitely helped pull me through.
Yeah, I think for me, the simple narrative moments, I'm not as big on the overall, like, okay, this is a father and a son, creativity being lost. All those themes are there, but they don't really resonate me. For me, it's the personal moments. It's where the dad is showing the kid how to place bricks to get across, and he
Hmm.
breaks it down a little bit so the kid has to use his imagination to rebuild a bridge to get across, and you see the dad doing things to teach you, the player, and the kid how to interact with the world and use your imagination to get through things. And that is, I think, best exemplified in the stand castle that is brought back up a handful of times throughout. You are started with a sandcastle as a tutorial. You reach a house halfway through and you build it there, and you're like, oh, this is fun. They're bringing it back, like it's all fun reference to the beginning. But then at the end, when you finally have to use that initial tutorial in a new creative way to essentially end the game, it's a really, that was the most heartfelt thing for me. It was like, oh
Yeah.
wow, they really brought this back. This idea follows through. It's an interesting way to see how you've grown and how they use the mechanic in a different way because you're putting extra pieces on it. I really loved that moment in particular.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think that they do a nice job iterating on those things. I think the use of the robot is particularly clever,
Yeah.
and even his almost like pseudo sacrifice towards the end of the game is also a nice moment.
Hmm.
It definitely feels very deliberate.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Even when I feel like the mechanics were kind of shaky, there was obviously a vision and a through line that takes you throughout the story, and I think that the length is going to be a big sticking point of the
Hmm.
experience for many, especially considering it's $20, which I feel is probably a little bit too expensive
Sure.
for
Yeah.
this title. But I don't think the game would be better for being longer. I
Hmm.
think that this is the right length for the experience.
No, I agree. I think that I'm not particularly upset that I spent $20 on it. Considering I did have an experience that when I'm looking for video games, I want them to do, especially indie games, I want them to do something unique. I want them to use the medium to tell a compelling story, use visual mechanics to get you to another level. I think this game, from what I'm looking out of an indie game, even if the entire thing didn't resonate with me, it was what I was looking for, and it gave me, a great soundtrack to listen to, some fun visuals to look at, a fun little story. So I'm not bummed that I spent $20. I do think it's probably too expensive. And I think that comes down to my final point, is that while it is over too soon because it is very short, it left me wanting more in a way that felt like something was missing. I think that this could have easily had a secondary mode on it where you can place blocks down free form,
Yeah,
extra challenge levels, something else to just give this visual style some more to do. Because when you finish the game and you are, booted back to the menu and you look at the menu, it's either replay levels or, settings. And
yeah,
that makes it feel a little bit bare bones. I think because I was so in love with the visual style and just the concept of using simple Lego bricks in this way. I wanted there to be something else. And the fact that there wasn't made me felt like there was, a chunk missing, some side modes, some, freeform, whatever.
Yeah, I think that free building idea is really great because I think so much of the game is wrapped up in this atmosphere that just letting you be back in that world a little bit, even if you can't make anything super complex, would have
Mhm.
been really great. But I think that also speaks to the fact that this was an Apple Arcade game originally,
Yeah,
and so the kind of developers have to think about, okay, this is going into a service model. We got to be kind of cognizant about how much content is in here and making sure that we're not spending too much time or whatever. I think that I'm really interested by Apple Arcade. We get a
mhm.
lot of ports from Apple Arcade to Switch, and I think you can clearly tell when a game was made for that smaller, more bite-sized format.
Yeah,
And the games are pretty great, but I do think that there's a pervasive issue with them probably being a little bit overpriced and a little bit light on content.
yeah,
But ultimately, I wasn't left wanting more because I think so much of the game is wrapped up in that presentation and that story, and I felt like I
sure,
got it. And also because I don't think I was quite as engaged by the mechanics as you were. But
sure.
I do still think there's a good experience in here.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those games that I can certainly recommend, but it's also one that I would say, play it on Apple Arcade, where it's essentially free. I mean, I don't think
Yeah.
we would have either of us would have had a lot of our issues with it probably would have been solved if it was on Apple Arcade. I'm sure the touch controls work a little bit better there. The price obviously wouldn't be an issue. The length wouldn't feel different, or sorry, that lack of extra content would feel different because I'm not paying for it on its own. This is very clearly a game that was designed for that, but I'm glad that they have ported it to other things.
Yeah.
I think it's a game worth experiencing. Just maybe wait for a sale. The final caveat of all of this being this game looks approximately 30 times better on a PC. They use volumetric lighting,
Yeah.
the all the
RTX.
RTX, DLSS, all these acronyms that I don't know what they actually mean, but I've seen PC footage and I'm like, wow, the Switch version's pretty gimped in terms of visuals. I think it still looks great. I think it's still in terms of the Legos, they look good, but this PC version is a next level experience. And if you have a PC and a way to play it on there with better visuals, go for that because the Switch
Yeah.
version it's the same price. You're just getting a little bit less of the visual experience that the game is really, I think, intended for.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. I played the entire thing in handheld. I know you were docked for a lot of your
I
playthrough.
was, yeah.
And I thought it looked again stunning in handheld mode. And I don't know, my subjective way I like to play, but I think that the handheld experience works pretty well for this game.
Mhm.
But I mean, maybe when the Switch Pro comes out, you can fucking play it with DLSS or XLW or whatever the fuck those PC nerds are doing. But
Mhm.
that's a good point.
Yeah. Do you want to come down on this with a rating? I'd be interested to see what you think.
I would probably I'll give it a backlogged rating because I don't want to
Yeah.
give it a 1 out of 10. I'd say this is probably a 3 out of 5 stars for me.
Okay.
I think the presentation and narrative lifted up where I feel like the mechanics, while the variety is compelling, doesn't always hit for me, and I think the controls just add a level of mediation that the experience.
Yeah. For me, it's just a little bit higher. I'll go 7 out of 10. I'm going to be bumping my backlog score down a little bit, which is, I think, just the fact that the game doesn't really have staying power for me. I'm still going to remember it fondly, but I doubt I'll ever go back to it. If
Yeah.
anything, if I have a chance to play it on PC with those great visuals, I'll do that then. And honestly, I'll probably boost my experience a little bit because just of how fantastic that game looks on PC. But a 7 out of 10 is still very solid. And I think on the whole, I can recommend this game.
Yeah, I would recommend it with a big asterisk of
Make
probably
sure you
wait
know what
for
you're
a
going in
sale.
for. Yeah.
Yeah, understand that you're going in for a 90-minute experience and just contextualize it. I think if you listen to this review and you still want to play it, then you're going to enjoy it,
Yeah.
basically.
Mhm. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much for listening to our review of Lego Builder's Journey, everyone. I will be here playing more video games. Abram will be coming here to play video games with me, and we'll have plenty of things for us to do together.
Like
That's
Endless
that.
Ocean.
That's true. That's a really fucking weird one. But we'll see you
Yeah.
guys in those videos. Bye.
See ya.